Hello, welcome to episode 3 of Cam's Corner. As always, I am your host, Cameron Lawrence. On today's episode, we're going to discuss some of the biggest busts in the fantasy drafts last season and some of the reasons that they were busts so we can avoid these types of players going into next season. Well, to start, we're going to look at the wide receiver position and Allen Robinson, who maybe was the biggest bust of the fantasy season. Allen Robinson was being taken in the 4th round, around wide receiver 16 to 18, depending on your platforms. Allen Robinson, by all accounts, had an incredibly disappointing season. Putting up only 2 touchdowns all year, Allen Robinson, we thought, could continue his dominance of 80-plus catches, 1,200-plus yards that we had seen the 2 years before. We thought that he was quarterback-proof. However, before the season started, Allen Robinson was franchise tagged, and he was not very happy. He was looking for a long-term deal. This is one of the first things that I think we need to look for when we're looking at how a player's season is going to go. Now, I want to clarify right away. Just because the player has one of these red flags doesn't mean we should automatically avoid. However, it is something to keep in mind. So Allen Robinson was already a little more unhappy with his situation in Chicago, and you could tell by looking on the field that he did not want to be there. The next thing is we just saw that there was terrible quarterback play in Chicago. And the biggest reason that there was such bad quarterback play is because going into the season, we didn't even know who the quarterback was going to be. We didn't know if it was going to be Andy Dalton. We didn't know if it was going to be Justin Fields. And then when we got into the season, there was this constant flip-flop, largely due to injury, but still there's no way to get consistent if their quarterback is flip-flopping back and forth. We also saw this with Terry McLaurin, where he just had terrible quarterback play in Washington, and they weren't able to move the ball downfield. Both of these players we saw could be really hindered by what we're seeing at the quarterback position. So that's our second thing we're looking for, is there something that is going to hinder their performance that they can't control? And the last thing we saw with Allen Robinson was actually the emergence of Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney commanded over 100 targets. You know, he kind of stepped up in this offense. And so if you got a guy like Allen Robinson, new quarterback, getting that chemistry together, Darnell Mooney was actually the one taking that step forward. So the next guy I want to talk about is Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley was another huge bust, drafted top 6 in ADP, crazy high. The reason that Saquon should be someone that we look at is because he was injured before the season even started. His season was kind of over or hindered before it even got started. We saw this in players like Curtis Samuel and Amari Cooper. These guys who missed all of training camp, most of preseason, never got into a rhythm, and they just had disappointing fantasy years. The other thing, a lot like those wide receivers, is Saquon Barkley had a bottom 3 offensive line in the NFL. If you can't block, you're not in a rhythm, you can't stay healthy, it is hard to be a productive fantasy asset. We look at that Amari Cooper, it just kind of seemed like something wasn't there. And that's what happens when you miss all of training camps, all of preseason. You're trying to play catch up the entire season. Curtis Samuel never even got started. He played maybe 2 games the whole year. The last position I want to look at is quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields were drafted very high these last couple of years. People were really excited about Trevor Lawrence, but we got to remember they are rookie quarterbacks. Most rookies are Peyton Mannings and not Justin Herberts. It's not to say that they can't be like Peyton Manning in the future and have a tremendous Hall of Fame career. But Peyton Manning had the interception record his rookie year. That is something that could be replicated by every single one of these rookies. They're more likely to be that than they are to be Justin Herbert and be at an all-pro level coming right out of college. So these are just some of the guys that I noticed were big fantasy busts based off of ADP. Now, as we go ahead to next year, let's just sum it all up. We don't want injuries before the season. I know some guys can come back for it, but that is definitely a red flag to watch for. If they're a money situation, that can affect, especially wide receivers, their play on the field. Quarterback, offensive line issues that people can't control. something you need to definitely be wary of. There were players who exceeded, Najee Harris, for example, with a bad offensive line. However, they need the tremendous volume to go with that. And I think the final thing is just recognizing that rookie or backup quarterbacks are going to hinder fantasy production, both for themselves and for the people that they're supporting. Thanks again for tuning in to Cam's Corner. We hope to catch you next week on our next episode.